Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here today. My name is Chris. I'm the rector of the cathedral, the dean of the diocese, and on behalf of Bishop John Stevens, who's right here, I welcome you here to the Cathedral of New Westminster and really all of Western Canada. We're so pleased to be able to host Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell today. Before we begin, I want to remind us that we here at the Cathedral are sitting on the ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Coast Salish peoples, and consistent with our values of community inclusion and respecting the dignity of every human being, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the Cathedral's relationships with Indigenous people. And today, we are stewards together of God's land, and I pray that we live more fully into the calls to action from the TRC. And without any further speaking on my behalf, I'd like to introduce Bishop John Stevens.
Oh, wow. Woo. You're going to clap for me on this morning? Anyway, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Great to be here. It's going to be a wonderful morning, and so I really appreciate you coming physically here. There are folks watching the live stream, and also the plan is that this is being recorded as well. So be polite when you're asking questions, that other people will be watching this, and you can also watch it later, so you'll have a chance to do that as well. So just to know that as we begin. I'd also just like to begin with prayer. So let's just enter into a place of prayer and to slow down our minds and our thoughts. Loving and gracious God, we gather here in this place and give thanks for your presence amongst us. We give thanks for your Holy Spirit that continues to move in and amongst us, inviting us, encouraging us, bringing us peace. We welcome that Holy Spirit. We give thanks for Archbishop Stephen, who is with us this morning. We look forward to hearing his words. Through those words, may we hear the words of the gospel and know an invitation to deepen our walk. Guide us, lead us, give us your wisdom for this day and always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So it's my great delight and real honor to be able to quickly introduce Archbishop Stephen Cottrell. Many of you know the name. A number of you have been reading and following this book, so Hit the Ground Kneeling. And thanks to Jessica for creating a study around that, and a number of you were participants in. You will really enjoy this morning. I guarantee that. Stephen is a very engaging speaker, is a lot of fun to be with. I picked him up at the airport on Thursday. Got into a lot of conversation in the car. Didn't get in an accident, but felt like it was getting close in the sense of I've got to pay attention to the road rather than the conversation, which, again, just very engaging. He's been doing essentially a cross-Canada tour, needed probably one of those tour buses as he went along, because he started in Newfoundland and obviously is here now in Vancouver with many stops along the way. And people have been so delighted to be able to share some time with him and just to gain some of his knowledge and insight. And so really excited about that. I heard Archbishop Stevens speak at Lambeth, at the Lambeth Conference, and I think there's nothing worse than speaking/preaching to a whole group of bishops from all around the world, and to hold them and being engaging to them, which of course he was, and people really, quite honestly, wanted him to keep going. There was this wonderful energy in the room when Archbishop Stephen spoke, and so I know that we will hear that today as we gather. So without any further ado, welcome to Archbishop Stephen. Delighted to have you here and very excited for this morning. Thank you so much.
Oh dear, after that I feel very confident you're going to be very disappointed. I was looking around to say, who is this engaging speaker? So just comfort yourselves with the thought, it'll all be over by 12:30, okay? This is a nice large space. If at any point during the morning, I mean, it's Saturday, you've probably had a long week. If you feel your eyelids dropping and you need to sleep, there's some pews over there you can lie down on, or just go to the back. It's fine, I quite understand. I was at a retreat being led a few years ago, and the priest leading the retreat said, never worry if you fall asleep when you're praying. God can do so much more with you when you're asleep. You don't get in the way so much. There is also, just to bring Bishop John and myself down a peg or two, there's also the story of the bishop who goes to see his or her spiritual director, pours out their woes and troubles and anxieties and stresses from Episcopal ministry, and after an hour or so, when eventually they've run themselves dry with all this angst, the spiritual director says to the bishop, well, Bishop, I suggest you sleep more. Oh, says the bishop, how would that help? It will limit the opportunity for you to do further damage, said the... So please, if you need to sleep, sleep. Or possibly you may feel the need to bang your head against a wall. There's plenty of wall space available in the cathedral. And I read recently that banging your head against a wall uses about 200 calories an hour. So it's very good exercise. So where to begin? Let me take you to... well, first of all, what are we going to talk about today? I think I want to talk to you today about, is there an Anglican way of living and sharing the gospel, an Anglican way of doing evangelism, that scary word that Anglicans don't like very much? We'll come back to that in a minute. Is there an Anglican way of planting new Christian communities? And to focus the question even more sharply, does your church have a maternity ward? And then another question, how do you lead in a world without maps, where God is calling us into new landscapes and uncharted territory? They're the kind of questions in my head, which I want to sum up with the question, so what kind of church is God calling us to be in this next chapter of our life together? What can we learn from one another here in Canada, and for me in the UK, and across our Anglican communion? And I want to start by taking you to Paddington Station in West London. So I was at Paddington Station in West London a few years ago, and I think I may have told this story at the Lambeth Conference. I was the keynote speaker at the Church in Wales Symposium on Evangelism, a really important gig. I mustn't be late. I'm at the station a bit earlier than I'm one of those people who never likes to be knowingly early. So I'm at the station a bit earlier than I want to be, and I decide to get a coffee from one of those coffee places on the station, which I reckon will be better than the coffee on the trolley on the train, a wise decision. As you know, getting decent coffee gets harder and harder, doesn't it, in the world? I mean, I've only been to Tim Hortons once. Not something I plan on repeating. It is one up from Starbucks, which Starbucks is truly appalling. Not really coffee at all. They've invented this new brown liquid drink, and they serve it in like 2-pint measures. Who wants scalding hot 2 pints of horrible brown liquid? Obviously lots of people. You find them across the world. Anyway, in England we have this chain called Cafe Nero, where the coffee is reasonably decent. So I go to buy a coffee, and you know how nowadays when you buy a coffee, you place your order, then the barista makes the coffee, and you kind of move along you know what I'm talking about. There's some nodding heads. Excellent. You've bought coffee. Great. You know what I'm talking about. So the barista's making the coffee. I'm waiting in the queue. Behind me is a young woman also waiting for her coffee. She looks me up and down and says to me, can I ask you, what made you become a priest? Now, I'd love to tell you at this point that I wasn't dressed like this. I didn't have my clerical collar on. It was just my natural aura of holiness, which had revealed to her that I was obviously a man of God. No, it wasn't that. I was dressed like this. I'm the keynote speaker at the church in Wales, Symposium on Evangelism, a really important gig. I mustn't be late. I've got a train to catch in 10 minutes. She says to me, what made you become a priest? And I think, oh, goodness, I've got a train to catch. That's my first thought. And then I enter into conversation with her, and I basically say to her, and by the way, the point of me telling you this story is that what she said to me is much more interesting than what I said to her, but I'll start off by telling you what I said to her. So I said to her, well, I've got two answers to that question. One short answer and one slightly longer answer. So the short answer, I thought I'd just go for it. The short answer is God. That's the reason I'm a priest. And I know it's such an obvious thing to say, but sometimes I think we Anglicans kind of need to be reminded that that's why we are followers of Jesus. That's why we're members of his church. That's why some of us are ordained in ordained ministry. It's because of God. And for us, God is not an interesting set of abstract propositions about the nature of the universe and the meaning of life. God is for us real. And I think I probably did say to this, though we were having a conversation, it's not a monologue, and I think I probably did say to her, so the thing is for us Christians is that when we say the word God, what we see in our hearts and imaginations is the person Jesus. That Jesus is for us. I know there's a few theologians in the room, so forgive me. This is me in evangelist mode, not systematic theologian mode. But I think I said to her things like, for us, Jesus is like the human face of God. For us, Jesus is God come down to earth. For us, Jesus is God on our side. For us, Jesus is God speaking to us in the only language that we really understand, which is the language of another human life. And I didn't say this to her because it was a conversation, not a monologue, but now I'm going into preacher mode, and I want to say to each one of you, and the God who is on our side, the God who is speaking to us in the only language we understand, which is the language of another human life, is the God who has so emptied God self of what it is to be God in order to know firsthand from the inside what it is to be human, that this God knows us. This God knows us from the inside. And this God has known each one of us from the very first moment of our being. When we were just a few cells dividing into life in the flood tide of our mother's womb, we were known and loved. And that's why, that's why we're doing what we're doing. It's God. And the other thing, I suppose, just for full transparency, it isn't necessarily what we want. It's not necessarily the life we chose. Other lives would actually be much easier. When people say, well, it must be all right for you having such a strong faith, I think, well, no, you've got no idea what faith is actually like. It's often dark and difficult. So I wasn't brought up going to church. There was no church in my life growing up, well, apart from baptism. My parents were part of the great post-war lapsed generation in the UK, probably the same in Canada, time of huge cultural changes. They didn't reject the Christian faith, they just stopped going to church. There was enough religion left inside them for us to be baptized, but that was basically it in terms of Christian formation. Not a bad thing, baptism. If you know Graham Greene's novel, The End of the Affair, baptism is everything. Anyway, I was baptized, but that was it in terms of church. I won't give you my whole testimony now. It would need to be serialized on BBC Two in 26 episodes. It's a long story. But, I mean, in case some of you are wondering, I did start, I can see a few puzzled faces over here. I did start going to church. I am now a Christian. I'm people looking at their program thinking I've come to the wrong event. I am the Archbishop of York. I'm a very important person. We'll come back to that later. But so for me as an adolescent, it was like a wrestling match with God. So I had this strong sense of the reality of God, but I definitely didn't like the church, and I didn't really know much about Jesus. In my adolescent mind, I was one of those dreamy, romantic adolescents who, it was a big disappointment for me that I was still alive at 25, because I wanted to die of tuberculosis in Florence, much earlier than that. That was my dreamy. So in my mind, in my adolescent mind, James Dean, Keats, Thomas Chatterton, and Jim Morrison, and Jesus Christ had all become one in my mind. So I didn't know about the Christian faith. I got no knowledge or formation. It was a wrestling match for me. But somewhere in the journey of my life, I caught a glimpse of who God is in Jesus Christ. And it utterly changed the direction of my life. And the thing is, I know that all of us have this in common. We've all got different stories to tell of how somewhere in the journey of our life we encountered the person of Jesus Christ, and it has changed the trajectory of our life. So much so that we're even prepared to give up a Saturday morning to come and listen to some puffed up archbishop from England talking about it. So do you know that we're still at Paddington Station, by the way? Just remember that we're still at Paddington Station. This is the short answer. This is the short answer. Wait till you hear the long answer. So one of my favorite bits of scripture is John chapter 6. I love John chapter 6. So John chapter 6, if you can't quite, draw it up into your head, John chapter 6 begins with the feeding of the 5,000. You know the story? Again, there's some puzzled faces here. You must have heard this story. 5,000 people. Jesus says, he teaches them, it's lunchtime. He says to the disciples, give them something to eat. They say to Jesus, you're having a laugh, aren't you? 1 month's wages wouldn't be enough to give this lot food. One small boy with the lunchbox, he gives his lunchbox to Jesus. Everyone is fed. That John chapter 6. I'm going to call that day one, because John chapter 6 is a long chapter. So day one, Jesus feeds 5,000 people. Then there's a little weird interlude. He walks on the water, he goes over, he comes back again. Then it's day two. So day two, all the crowd who were fed on day one come back. Well, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, if you've had a fabulous free lunch on day one, you're going to come back on day two. Of course you are. So they all come back on day two. Only on day two, I'm rather paraphrasing quite a long passage of John's Gospel. Again, theologians forgive me. But on day two, Jesus doesn't feed them. On day two, Jesus says, I am the bread. I am the bread. And then they don't like that. And so they all disperse. And then you get right towards the end of John chapter 6. For me, one of the most beautiful and also the hardest and saddest bits of the gospel story. Jesus is now alone. All the crowds have gone. He's now alone with the 12 disciples. He turns to them and he says, I suppose you're going to go as well. And at this point, Peter steps forward. And Peter says, where else can we go? Now, I interpret that to mean, if there is an exit, please show me the exit. But then Peter says, you have the words of eternal life. Now, dear friends, that is my story as well as Peter's story. My story is that somewhere on the journey of my life, I caught a glimpse of who God is in Jesus Christ, and there's nowhere else to go. My life has been completely mucked up because of that. The trajectory of my life has changed. It is not the life I thought I would have, and it's not always easy. And sometimes it would be much easier not to be a follower of Jesus, and sometimes it would be a lot easier to be a follower of Jesus who has just become someone who goes to church rather than someone who has been commissioned by Jesus to share this with others and to be an agent for God's purposes in the world, because that's hard. But I also believe, you may not have put it like this before, but that's your story. Your story is that you too have encountered Jesus. You too have had the trajectory of your lives changed. You too have got this inkling that being a follower of Jesus cannot just be for yourself. It has to be for others, and it has to be for the world. And therefore, what we have seen in Jesus has to be lived and shared with others. Let me just read you what we are still at Paddington Station. This is still the short answer. Let me read you what the Lambeth Conference of 1998 said about Christian formation. Unless Christians are encouraged to go to school with Christ, to be nourished by his teaching and sacraments, and to grow into his likeness, underline this bit in your head, they cannot bear the fruit of discipleship. That we are called to be followers of Jesus who bear fruit by sharing that with others, by living it in our day-to-day lives, and by, do you know the Alleluia chorus at the end of the Handel's Messiah? Of course you do. Handel's Messiah, Alleluia chorus. They're giving it some welly, Alleluia, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, all that amazing stuff. And then just for a moment in the Alleluia chorus, you get this moment of profound solemnity where the whole music shifts just for a few bars and they sing a line from the book of Revelation. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our God and of his Christ. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our God and of his Christ. What we pray every day, thy kingdom come. And if we are followers of Jesus, then it cannot just be for us. It must be lived and shared, and it must make a difference in the world, that we become agents of God's purposes of peace and justice in and for the world. The church can never be for itself. The Roman Catholic documents on evangelization also make this very, very clear. Pope Paul VI's encyclical, Evangelization in the Modern World from the 1950s, has an amazing passage in it, which I'm now kind of quoting from memory, but it says something like, it lists all the great joys and treasures of the Christian church, the reading of Scripture, the receiving of the sacraments, the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of the bread. It lists them all, and it then says, these only acquire their full meaning when they become witness. Which I think therefore means that if you are not involved in the witness and ministry and outreach of the church, then actually you've never really received Holy Communion. You've never really read the Bible. They only become what they are meant to be when they Sorry, I'm spoiling the morning now. I realize that. This is not what you came to hear. That God has a purpose for your life, that you are called to be part of his mission and ministry of love and service to these communities where you live and serve. That because of our baptism, each and every one of us is part of this. So I said to her at Paddington Station, it's God. That God is not an interesting set of abstract propositions about the nature of the universe and the meaning of life. God is real because God has become known to us in Jesus Christ. He's on our side. He is for us and he is for the world. That was the short answer. The slightly longer answer, which I have also now prefigured in my short answer, the longer answer was, I said, the reason I became a priest is because I want to change the world. And that's where I stand. I'm a follower of Jesus because God is real, and God is real in Jesus, and because I want to change the world. And I don't know what you think when you look at the world at the moment, but I look at the world and I see such sorrow, such confusion, such hurt. And I think what the world needs is precisely what we have been given in Jesus Christ. Precisely. And so how will the world know and receive the possibility of peace, a way of breaking the cycles of vengeance and retribution which convulse the world? How will that happen? Well, again, sorry to spoil the morning, God does not have a plan B. God has a plan A. And God's plan A is that it is through his church that Jesus' ways of peace and justice, of forgiveness and healing are made known. Rowan Williams, the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, was asked in a sort of Q&A at a session like this, I guess, what's the church? And he replied, again, I'm quoting from memory, but I think it's pretty much this is what he said. So what's the church? He said, the church is that bunch of women and men who have been so impacted by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that they formed a small community around him and they're trying to change the world. I think it's a pretty good definition of the church. Okay, so that's what I said to her. She said, what made you become a priest? I said, I got two answers. Short answer, slightly longer answer. Short answer, God. Slightly longer answer, I want to change the world. And we had a bit of a chat about this, and I've got an eye on the clock because I've got my train to catch. Coffee's arrived now. I had a flat white. You don't seem to get many flat whites. You need to tell me afterwards where to get a flat white in, because I've travelled across. But we started in Newfoundland. We went to Montreal. We've been to, where did we go after Montreal? Sault Ste. Marie. Then we went to Winnipeg, then Moose Jaw. We loved Moose Jaw. And then we went to somewhere else, Kelowna, and then we've come to Vancouver. So we've travelled across your amazing country, but not had many flat whites. Yeah, but then trouble is Starbucks, they don't put coffee in their coffee, so it's that other brown liquid they've invented. So anyway, so that's what she said to me. But if you remember, I said that's what I said to her. What she said to me was more interesting. So we're having this conversation, and she says to me, and bear in mind that she initiated this conversation. And the other thing that sometimes concerns me, in the Church of England, and if you forgive me being presumptuous, here in Canada, having now met with a lot of Christian people across Canada, what concerns me is that we've perhaps started thinking that people outside the church are not interested. Or we think to ourselves, because let's face it, I think I've learned a lot in the last 2 weeks about the damage that has been done to indigenous communities by the bringing of the Christian faith, that kind of colonial way of evangelizing. The irony of me as an English archbishop standing here telling you this isn't lost on me, by the way, but I've learned a lot about that. That maybe in the church in Canada you're thinking to yourselves, well, one, actually nobody's really that interested in what we've got to offer anyway. And then the history of the bringing of the gospel in this land has done a lot of damage. So maybe if we just become a little kind of nice Christian club in our church is fine. Maybe try to bring a few lapsed people back again. Maybe that's the job. I worry about that, or I wonder about that. Anyway, she says to me, and she initiated the conversation. She sought me out. She says, when I speak to people of faith, I think that's the expression she used, people of faith, i.e., I started to think, yeah, you've had this conversation with a number of people from different faiths. She's clearly a seeker. She said, when I speak to people of faith, she said they seem to fall into two categories. She says, on the one hand, there's people who faithful Christian people, and possibly other faiths as well, faithful Christian people who go to church, but their faith is kind of like their hobby. It's their leisure time activity. We all have leisure time activities, don't we? I mean, some of us, I went to the hockey last night. I loved the hockey, by the way. That's another subject. I'll talk about that later. I loved going to the hockey. So some people go to the hockey, and it's pretty all-consuming passion to go to the hockey. Some people might do watercolors for beginners. Some people might do, conversational Spanish. I don't know. We've all got different things that we do in our leisure time. And she was kind of saying, and some people go to church. But their lives outside of going to church are indistinguishable from everybody else's life. So the conclusion is, therefore, faith is like just their hobby. It's just what they like to do. But it doesn't make a difference to their life. Footnote to the talk. I am not here intending to promulgate the great English heresy that faith is measured by what you do, or even worse, by how good you are. So for instance, when people say to me, oh, the church is full of hypocrites, I always reply, yes, and there's room for one more. Please come and join us. We don't pretend to be anything other than sinners taking the cure. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting faith is about being good or about the good things that you do. I hope you are good. I hope you do good things. But faith is about relationship with the living God that overflows, both in penitence, because we realize how much we need God, but also in service, because that's where we're going to find God, and that's what God asks us to do. So her observation was, when I meet with people of faith, they seem to fall into two categories. There's people for whom it just seems a bit like their hobby. And then she said, and there's another group, and these are her exact words. So they were so powerful, they seared themselves into my mind. She said, there's another group of people who embrace their faith so tightly, it frightens everyone else away. And they were hard words to hear. And we are all aware of that kind of faith. A narrow, judgmental, fanatical kind of faith. So then she says to me, is there another way? Is there another way? And at this point, I really, really, really got to get on my train. I'm going to miss it. And so I say to her, look, I'm really sorry. I've got to go now. I never even found her name. But I said to her, I really do believe there is another way. The other way is the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is a generous, inclusive, non-coercive, non-judgmental way of living. It is a way of life, and it's a way of life which overflows with goodness and generosity and service to others. I wanted to say to her, but there wasn't time, it's not a religion. It's a way of inhabiting life. But I didn't have time. So I just said to her, look, I think there is another way. It's the way of Jesus. You will find it at your local church. Go to your local church and you will find it. And then she got her train. I got my train. So this has been like a very, very long introduction. But I hope it's important to see it this way. Because my fear is that, say that young woman did go to her local church. Say she followed up on my advice. It doesn't thrill me to say this, but I'm not confident about what she would find. There are some churches which I think I'd love her to find her way to that church. But my question to myself in the Church of England, my question to you in Canada is, are we churches that are ready to receive seekers? People who don't know anything about the Christian faith, have perhaps never been to church in their lives. Are we ready to receive such people? And even more, are we prepared, put it crudely just to make the point, to go out and find them? To say that those words at the end of Matthew's Gospel, go into all the world and make disciples, that they are spoken to us. It doesn't say go into all the world and see if you can draw back some lapsed Anglicans. It says make disciples of all the nations. It doesn't say make converts. It doesn't say make churchgoers. Make disciples, people who live and breathe this gospel story in the way that we live and breathe it. And then I guess all the other questions come hammering in about, well, one, I'd be too embarrassed to do anything like that, or secondly, you may have found somebody on Paddington Station, but nobody else is interested, or thirdly, but what about the damage that has been done in the past through evangelism? Which is why I want to share with you an Anglican way of doing it, about creating spaces where people can find faith and possibly even planting new communities of faith. But we'll come on to that in a minute. I've been talking for way too long. This is a chance for you to talk to each other. And all I'm inviting you to do in the next, say, 4 or 5 minutes is simply process and reflect on all that stuff that I've shared with you. And if you need a question to get you started, the question is, so, if you bumped into somebody later today who is not a member of the church, and they said to you, so, you're a priest, you're a bishop, you're a dean, you're a member of whichever congregation you're part of, so what's all that about? Why'd you do that? What would you say to them? What would you say to them? So, 5 minutes or so, just in 2s or 3s. Going across Canada, one thing I've discovered is Canadians are like really bad at counting. Really bad. So you say get into a group of 3, and 14 people hive themselves off. So 3, in case you, is a number larger than 2 and less than 4, okay? But you do whatever you want to do. So 5 minutes, just reflecting on that, and maybe saying, so what would you say if you met somebody? but it's nice. Okay, so the conversation has become so animated, I feel very confident you must be talking about something else. So, so I feel I better draw you back. Perhaps you're on last night's hockey. So, I mean, it'd be good to have a chance for a little bit of conversation or Q&A if anybody has anything. There'll be more chance later on, but does anybody gagging to say something, an insight, an observation, a thought that you've had, or a question you're burning to ask, please feel free if you do. Or we can sit in companionable silence for a few minutes. Oh, hang on, wait, there's a microphone coming.
What you said in your presentation this morning was very similar to the way fundamentalists work. The fundamentalists that I know, they tend to get people into their area by visiting the care homes like I'm in, and they tend to try and get people into their area the way you mentioned it.
In relation to that?
Well, in relation to joining the church, to
Yeah.
be a part of their church.
Yeah. So what I hope I'm saying is the precise opposite of that, but obviously that's what you heard. But we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that in a minute, because I want to say some more about how we might go about doing this. But thank you. There's a lady here.
I would like to shed a light on a dear neighbor and friend sitting 2 rows behind. Her name is Lynn, the lady wearing the sage color cardigan. And she was sharing with us that she served in the Monte Cafe, and she sometimes, as an introverted person, she feels that she might need to do something more assertive, something just more. But from what she's describing to me and my husband, we feel that her beautiful presence, just in the way of being hospitable in a non-threatening way, and offering her gift of deep, loving listening and long, loving gazing, with the highest regard, unconditional regard to those people coming through the door just to have a warm meal. And I find she actually is absolutely a very good example, and one version of the good example of you might be talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a beautiful story. And I mean, I know the word evangelism can be scary, and as soon as we hear it, we think of these coercive, judgmental models, but there are many, many other ways of doing this. And somebody said, the best evangelism is the Christ-like witness of ordinary Christian people in their ordinary daily lives. And it's what Christians of a previous generation would have spoken about as the pursuit of holiness. That when we are close to Jesus and live our lives close to him, there's that beautiful passage in the second letter to the Corinthians where it says, we with our unveiled faces reflect the glory that we see, and therefore our presence, our demeanor, our kindness, our generosity, these communicate really, really powerfully. Thank you for that story, and thank you. So there's a lady here, yeah.
Thank you so much. I've really been enjoying what you've been saying so far, and welcome to Vancouver. Just from our chat in the group here, it was really interesting. I think a lot of us shared this feeling that even though we might not relate intellectually or, think about the literal meaning of the prayers, we felt a spiritual benefit from coming to church every Sunday. Even if it was just on a kind of mesmeric level, we felt it was a vehicle for the Holy Spirit. One thing that came up in the conversation, and one thing that I personally struggle with, is you talked about hypocrites. We're all hypocrites, right? Welcome. How to reconcile my Christian faith with what is going on in the world and not feel like a hypocrite when I come to church on Sunday. I say that as a journalist who works a lot with Christian communities in Iraq and Palestine. So coming to church every Sunday, which to me is a kind of spiritual practice, and then going out into the world and doing my work, which is writing about peace and reconciliation, and not feeling like a hypocrite, reconciling those two things.
Yeah. So, I do believe that one of the ways in which we best witness to our faith and share it with others is by boldly developing a compelling narrative about what it means to live in the world, and therefore confronts the big issues of peace and injustice. Another big issue would be climate emergency. That the Christian faith should have something to say to these things, does have something to say to these things. However, often the life we have in the church, it doesn't look or feel like that, which I guess is what you're putting your finger on. But I do believe what we see and receive in Jesus, his way of reconciliation is what is needed in the unfolding horrors in Iran and Israel and Gaza at the moment. So I don't have an answer to your question. I share that tension, but I'm not suggesting you're saying this. I think the danger is that we withdraw into ourselves, and so that the life of faith just becomes a private thing between us and God, feeding our spiritual life, but not confronting the big injustices and issues of the world, when actually what we've received in Jesus is just what the world needs. So I live with that tension. I'm sorry, I've got nothing else to say. There was a lady here, and then we'll push on in the green.
Thank you. My understanding is that before you were the very important Archbishop of York, you were a little bit infamous for the neighborhood pilgrimages that you took in your parish communities, and you would go out and walk and walk and walk. And I was interested, I think you were intending to come here to Vancouver some years back before the pandemic intervened, and I was hoping back then to hear about that and your experiences, and I don't know if that's something that you would touch on as part of this middle way of evangelism.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The trouble with you asking me that question, because that wasn't what I've been asked to talk about today, the trouble with you asking me that question is it will be like turning on a tap, and you'll get, the next hour will disappear as I reflect on those things. So I'm going to have to apply a self-denying ordinance. However, where the connection is that I do believe pilgrimage is a really helpful motif, embedded in scripture and tradition, a really helpful motif for understanding both the journey of faith and the journey into faith. And so that's a very useful thing to explore. So let me put it this way. For most people, that was my story, for most people, becoming a Christian is like a journey. Therefore, and this is the difference from fundamentalism, therefore evangelism is best understood as accompanying people on the journey. You know, not trying to sell them a product, not trying to force them to do something they don't want to do, not trying to persuade them, certainly not trying to, put some guilt trip on them, but walking alongside them, doing what Jesus did. For me, the paradigm shift in my thinking has been from a kind of Damascus Road model to an Emmaus Road model. So again, let's not make too many false distinctions between those narratives, but so often evangelism was thought about this moment of conversion, which we then try to engineer, or indeed, at our worst, coerce people into, impose, compared with what we see on the Emmaus Road, where, I think it's quite funny. Jesus on the Emmaus Road, his first words to, well, hang on, let's have a bit of fun. we'll just have a little bit of fun for a moment. Does anybody know what, only answer if you're very confident, does anybody know what the first words that the risen Jesus spoke on the Easter day were? The first words Jesus spoke on the first Easter day. We've got a biblical scholar in the front row. Oh, well, God, goodness me, there is a biblical. You're wrong, but you're very, 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 you're very, 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 very nearly there. Yeah, very, very nearly there. Somebody else got the answer? Yes, sir. Oh, yes, there's a true biblical scholar here. Mary. Yeah, so Mary. Yeah, you're wrong, but it's a really... Yeah. Oh, the bishop obviously knows, so I won't ask him. Obviously. I won't trouble to ask him. He obviously knows the answer. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody brave enough to have a go? But, I mean, you're almost there. You're almost there. So first of all, the true biblical scholar, which our gentleman here is obviously, would be, depends which gospel we're reading. First of all, depends which gospel we're reading. It's different in each one. But if chronologically you reckon John's account gives us the earliest account, early in the morning while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. She finds the tomb empty, she goes into the tomb, she comes out of the tomb, she gets Peter and John, they come to the tomb, they go into the tomb, they go out, the men are running around like headless chickens doing what men do in crises, not much, but they look busy. Mary lingers at the tomb and she beholds somebody she thinks is the gardener, and anybody got there yet? And he says to her, yay, we got there. Well done, we got there. Whoever said that, I couldn't see who said that, but well done, yes. Woman, why are you weeping? Woman, why are you weeping? So first of all, I want to say, isn't it interesting that we forget that it doesn't spring to our minds instantly? Woman, why are you weeping? I mean, it's just, so if I said to you, just rewind, so ask you the question, what's the first thing Jesus said on the first Easter day? And you said, I've got no idea. And I said, well, have a guess. Have a guess, what did he say? If you read the account, Mary stood in the garden, she saw somebody she thought was the gardener. He said to her, I have risen from the dead, I have cast down Satan underfoot. I've opened the gate of glory. I've forgiven that. You wouldn't be surprised, would you? You wouldn't be surprised. You would forgive Jesus a bit of uncharacteristic triumphalism on such an occasion as the resurrection. But not only does Jesus not say any of that, his words, I mean, they're beautiful, aren't they? I'm slightly troubled by a gentleman in the front there. I'm going to try to convert you to another way of doing evangelism, because this is a million miles away from the way that fundamentalists do it. The first thing that Jesus says is, why are you weeping? Jesus reaches out to the sorrow in Mary's heart. And at this point, she still doesn't recognize him. He then says, his second words, who are you looking for? Now there's a question. And I believe that is a question that every human person asks in one form or another. Every human person wants to build their life on some set of values, to have some set of purpose and direction in their lives. Who are you looking for? There's lots of people you could follow. There's lots of ways of living your life. But who are you looking for? What will be the foundation of your life? They're two amazing questions. Why are you weeping? Who are you looking for? Then on the back to the Emmaus Road, pilgrimage is a motif for this. The first words Jesus speaks in Luke's Gospel are on the Emmaus Road. He comes alongside Cleopas and his companion, and he says, what are you discussing as you walk along? Again, that's an amazing question. what are you discussing as you walk along? It's the classic counselling question. You know, that if you've ever been counselled or if you've ever been trained as a counsellor, that's the first question, isn't it? You learn that you need to let the other person set the agenda, so you ask an open, generous question. What are you discussing? What are your issues? What are your concerns? They then say to Jesus, well, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's been happening, these past few days. And Jesus then says, which is, I think, is the funny bit, Jesus then says, oh, what things? Like he doesn't know what's been happening. He does know what's been happening in Jerusalem. It has been quite a weekend. He does know. But Jesus is holding back. Now, I'm now jumping ahead to something I was going to say later, but we're in there now. Thank you. Thanks to your question. No, it's fine. It seems to me that if, for most people, becoming a Christian is like a journey, then that scary word evangelism is simply about helping people make the journey. And how will we learn what to do as we help people make the journey? Well, we'll look to Jesus. And what better place to look than the first Easter day? And notice that Jesus rises from the dead, not making doctrinal statements, but asking searching pastoral questions. Why are you weeping? Who are you looking for? What are you discussing? Because these are questions that form relationship. These are questions which look to the sorrow in people's hearts. Don't dodge the big issues about, so what direction will your life take? What are the values you're going to live by and follow? But also say, but you can set the agenda. What are your concerns? What are your issues? I want to say these are evangelistic questions, because they are questions which help people make a journey and form community. And that's why one of my questions at the beginning of the morning was, does your church have a maternity ward? Let's get on to that question. Does your church have a maternity ward? Now, I've got 3 kids. 2 of them were born while we lived in Huddersfield in West Yorkshire. Huddersfield in West Yorkshire has got 2 hospitals. One hospital has a maternity ward, the other one doesn't. Are you following me? When my wife Rebecca went into labour, we went to the hospital which has the maternity ward, not the one, we're not stupid. We went to the one that has the maternity ward, not the one that doesn't. And when we got there, it was quite late, it was 10, 11 o'clock at night. When we got there wasn't a sign up on the door saying our normal hours of business are 9 till 5, please call back in the morning. No, it was open 24 hours a day. And when we arrived, her name was in the book of life on the, on the reception. We were expected. I mean, this might be the same in Canada. I don't know. You must have maternity wards. I imagine they're open 24 hours a day, 360 hours, like they are in the UK. And then I think to myself, there must be the odd occasion when no babies are being born. So the people in the maternity ward, they don't pack up and go home. They are motivated by a high expectation, simply this: people are going to have babies. They're doing it in West Yorkshire, they're doing it over here in Canada, they're going to have babies, it's going to happen. I hope by now you're 2 steps ahead of me. Does your church have a maternity ward? Now, this is the mindset change that I think we need to make in the Anglican Church. If we want to have a vision that is bigger than gathering the lapsed, occasionally somebody might because I think that's the other thing the Anglican Church is. See, we think we're the superior brand, don't we? If we're honest. There's a kind of smorgasbord of Christian traditions and denominations, but we're the best. We know that. We don't crow about it too much, but we know that we're the superior brand. So we also reckon that people will become Christians in other denominations, and then in due course, they will graduate into the Anglican Church. And the thing is, this does happen. Most years, people find their way to the Anglican Church, often recovering from other slightly more, those who hug it so tightly it frightens everyone else away. They do. And that's great. That's good. But if we want to have a vision which is slightly bigger than gathering up the lapsed and welcoming in the recovering whatevers, then the mindset change might be, so should we build a maternity ward? So we'll take the analogy a little bit further, then we'll leave it behind. So if you think you're pregnant nowadays, what's the first thing you do? Apart from scream, that is. What's the first thing you do if you think you might be pregnant? This is audience participation time. What would you do? Take a test, yeah. Go to the pharmacy, get a test. And it's pretty basic, isn't it, at that point? Because you're asking yourself a very basic question, is this real? We're right back to Paddington Station with a very, very basic conversation. Is this real or not? Is God real? Is it just an interesting set of ideas? Is it your leisure time activity? Or is it real? And the thing is, and I think this is, if you don't mind me saying, I think this is particularly true in Vancouver. Vancouver, just from my little understanding of Vancouver has changed massively in the last 20, 30 years. It's a wonderful smorgasbord of human communities from different parts of the world. And there's a lot of faith here. People of Christian faith from other places in the world and of other faith communities. But there's also a lot of people who don't know whether they've got any faith at all, but they're probably not atheists. Some are, obviously. There's a lot of people who there isn't a test, but they wish there was. They want to find out, is this real or not? Is this real? So my question to you is, if you really did have a conversation like the one I had on Paddington Station later today or tomorrow, you bump into somebody, you don't initiate the conversation, they initiate it, they come up to you, and they say, so I gather you go to church. What made you go to church? And you however tentatively share with them. You say, well, this is what it means for me. Just imagine that happens. And then they say, well, I would like to find out more. What do you say? Especially if they also say to you, I'd like to find out more, but frankly, I don't think I'm ready to come to, in fact, I don't think I want to come to church. Because I don't want to sing your hymns, and I don't want to say your creeds, because that's not where I am. But I would like to find out more. What can we offer them? And the reality is, this is true in the UK, the reality is that most churches are simply not geared up for those kind of conversations. We operate a come-to-church model. So if you're ready to come to church, that's great. If you like church culture, that's great. But if you're not ready to come to church, if you don't know what you believe, and if you did come to church and you just don't fit our slightly weird Anglican church culture, frankly, we love to say that we're a very welcoming church, but frankly, we're not. We welcome people who are like us, who can fit in with our church culture and who already have got a certain amount of faith. then you're welcome. But actually, we better put a sign up for everybody else to say, actually, anybody who doesn't know whether they believe or not and doesn't know the culture, actually, probably best if you stay away. How could we shift that? And by the way, I don't know the answer to this question, okay? I just think it's a really interesting question. And it's an interesting question because there's a world out there. There's a world, and that conversation I had on Paddington Station is not an isolated conversation. Everywhere I go, I get into conversations with people who are not saying, I'm just gagging to come to church on Sunday, but they are saying, in one way or another, I would really love to find out more. And so the first idea, and it's not a new idea, and I know many of your churches will have done this or will be doing this, but maybe we could do it more and do it better, is there somewhere in your church which is like a maternity ward, somewhere where people can come and find out, they can have an ultrasound scan and find out whether this thing is real or not. And mostly that will be outside of Sunday morning. Mostly that will be outside of Sunday morning. Though just to complicate matters further, here's two other thoughts. So hold that thought. Thought number one. Well, this is question to take away from this morning, number one. What about some place in your church where people can come and find out, which is not Sunday morning? What would that look like for your church? That's takeaway number one. Here's two things to complicate matters. First thing is, what would it look like if it was Sunday morning? How would Sunday morning need to change? So this is my hobby horse, okay? So I'm going to ride my hobby horse around your cathedral once, then I'll get off. Have you ever thought about renegotiating the Sunday contract? Renegotiating the Sunday contract. Oh, I've got somebody who thinks this might be a good idea. Bless you, sister. So there is a contract, isn't there? But it's unwritten. So I don't know what it said. What time's the service here tomorrow, Mr. Dean? 10:30. Okay, 10:30. Okay, so it's... And is there a notice board outside saying 10:30? There's a notice board outside saying 10:30. Out of interest, because I've never been here before, does it say on the notice board what time it ends? No. Okay? So that will be true, I think, of pretty much every church there is. It tells you what time it starts. It doesn't tell you what time it ends. But if I'm coming for the first time, I want to know this. I want to know, if I'm coming at 10:30, what time will I be free? So I come along, I come in the door for 10:30, I ask somebody on the door, I've not been here before, out of interest, what time does it end? I bet you they could tell me. I bet it ends 10:30, I bet it ends by 12, roughly. 11:45, you see. The dean, no, it's 11:45 it ends. And then there's like coffee afterwards. So it starts at 10:30, it ends at 11:45, there's coffee afterwards. I can be on my way by 12:15 comfortably. That's great, that's useful to know. Woe betide the dean or priest who breaks the contract. So if it's going to fit in with an envelope of 1 hour and 15 minutes, you could only have, 4 or 5 hymns. The sermon's got to be, 10 or 12 minutes? I bet visiting preachers are probably told 10 or 12 minutes, 15 max. Woe betide the priest who breaks the contract. So forgive me picking on you, but since we're in the cathedral. So if you decide tonight, do you know what? I think tomorrow we'll have 17 hymns tomorrow. And we've got a great preacher. I'll say to the preacher, just go for it. Half an hour, 40 minutes, that's fine. I mean, we don't do it. We don't do it. I tell you what we do though, and this happens in every church across the Anglican Communion and probably other denominations as well, is we go to all that trouble of getting people to come on Sunday. They all know, starts at 10:30, finishes 11:45. We all know that, even though it's not written down. We then devote, so what's that? 75 minutes, okay? 75 precious minutes. We then devote 5 of those precious 75 minutes trying to persuade people, wait for it, no other organization in the world would be so stupid. We devote 5 of the precious 75 minutes trying to persuade people to come back later the same day. That's what we do in England, later the same, or on Tuesday evening. So we have this thing called the notices, and in the notices we say, we've got this thing happening this evening. Here in the same building that you're in at the moment, could you please come back? Or we got a thing on Tuesday night or Wednesday night, and usually the things that we're trying to invite people back to are discipleship things. Things about deepening your faith. Things about tackling issues of social justice and what that means. Things about the life of prayer. The really important stuff about living your life as a follower of Jesus. Please come back this evening for that. Please come back on Tuesday for that. Any other organization in the world would tear its hair out saying, they're here at the moment. They're here. Why are you trying to persuade them to come back later? Are you that stupid? Renegotiate the contract and say, instead of coming for 75 minutes, why not come for 90 minutes? Why not come for 120 minutes? And if that's too much, maybe just once a month. Just think what you could do. Think how that could transform the life of your church. All the things you long to do. To grow in prayer, in discipleship, to see how faith relates to life, to develop those compelling narratives of what faith says to life, to create a space where those who haven't been before can be incorporated into what's happening. Which is, after all, that's what you do with your children, isn't it? You don't expect children to sit through the whole 75 minutes. That you think, well, no, that wouldn't be appropriate for them, so we'll do some other activities, which we call Sunday school or children's liturgy. We do other things for children because we intuitively reckon, well, they couldn't sit through the, but we expect everybody else to sit through. Everybody else has to sit through the 75 minutes. I went to a church a few years ago which reimagined Sunday morning as if it was a multiplex cinema, which I thought was really, it was really creative. And so when you arrived at 10:30, there were 3 or 4 options in different places in the building. So if you wanted church as we know it, then that was one of the options. But if you wanted just contemplative silence and meditation, that was happening somewhere else in the building at the same time. And if you wanted discussion, you much wanted more a discursive group wrestling with faith kind of thing, that was happening somewhere else. If you were a total beginner, there was something somewhere else. Now, obviously to do that needs lots of resources, which is most churches aren't able to do that. But I thought, somebody's trying to rethink what it means to come to church on Sunday in a way that will be accessible to more people. I think it's at least worth thinking about. So takeaway number 1 is, does your church have a maternity ward? Is there somewhere which probably isn't Sunday to help people find out about this stuff? Takeaway question number 2 is, what about if it was Sunday? Is it worth thinking about small, modest, maybe once a month we stay for an extra half hour and maybe just do some discussion thing over the coffee? That's question number 2. Question number 3 is the most challenging question of all. Question number 3 is, do we need to start again? So if for most people becoming a Christian is like a journey, if the work of evangelism is best understood as helping people make the journey, if it is done in the way that Jesus did it, in ways that are not judgmental, not coercive, not trying to persuade people to do things, but accompanying them and building community and being led by their questions, and if, as a result of that, you find a small group of people who actually, perhaps in your maternity ward outside of Sunday morning, those people really do want to grow and explore faith more, why do they need to come on Sunday at all? Why can't that be church? And certainly in the UK, and I know in large parts of Canada, this is proving to be the most effective means of mission. Sometimes it's called church planting, but I know that phrase carries all kinds of other quasi-imperialistic connotations which aren't necessarily terribly helpful. So I'm going to call it, which is what we call it now in the Church of England, new Christian communities. New Christian communities. So that alongside what happens on Sunday, reimagined or not, you might have one or two other little Christian communities which are not stepping stones into the real thing Sunday morning, but they are church, or they are embryonic church. And certainly when I think of what I do know about Vancouver, I concede not much, but what I do know of Vancouver, with many of the new communities that are coming into the city that you are serving, it might be that a new Christian community is the very best way of enabling them to grow and discover a faith. Couple of stories to illustrate this. Story number one from my own ministry as a parish priest. So when I was a parish, and this is the most modest end of the spectrum of new Christian communities, then we'll go to the more radical end. So the modest end. I inherited a Wednesday morning Eucharist, which many Anglican churches have, midweek Eucharist. About 8 or 9 faithful people came to the midweek Eucharist. And I would preside every Wednesday. After about 6 months or so, I noticed there was a few people coming on Wednesday mornings who didn't come on Sunday. 2 of them were young mums. And I visited them to talk to them about why they came on Wednesdays and not Sundays, because I really thought they should come on Sundays, because Sunday is proper church. And they had really good reasons why they didn't come on Sundays. It was actually about tension in the family with their husband about church, and tension with their kids who had many, many other extracurricular activities, sports-wise, on Sundays. And so just said, Sunday's a battleground for me, and therefore I noticed you had a Wednesday morning service, I come on Wednesdays. Fair enough. I really thought they should come on Sundays. The other person was an elderly woman, Margaret. Elderly, she was, I don't know, I'm getting old, so 70 now looks really young to me. So she was a young woman in her 70s. And she just started coming. Now, I don't really know why, she just started coming to church. She hadn't been confirmed. So we got her confirmed, she just started coming. And nobody told Margaret that in the Church of England, you don't tell people about your faith. Nobody told her that. So she started telling her friends. And she had quite a wide network of friends in that age group. And she turned out to be a really, really good evangelist, because she starts turning up almost every Wednesday, bringing somebody with her. And suddenly I'm finding that what started as a congregation of 8 or 9 people is now up to 15 or 16 people. And then a year or so later, we got about 20 people coming on Wednesday, and now over half of them never come on Sunday. At which point, for me, the penny dropped. That while I was fighting a rearguard action to keep Sunday special, imagining this was what church should be, the Holy Spirit had danced on ahead of me and was blessing Wednesday. Because in British culture, and I imagine Canadian culture is similar, a lot of people work on Sundays. For families, there's all the tensions of other activities for the kids, and also for many partners, the partner doesn't share your faith. When the penny dropped, I started putting resources into Wednesday. So we started singing some hymns on Wednesday. We started having coffee after the service on Wednesday. We very quickly renegotiated the Wednesday contract, and once a month, the whole congregation went into our church hall for, a sort of discipleship program activity. By the time I left that church, it wasn't unusual to have about 40 people at church on Wednesday, most of whom didn't come on Sunday. I had planted a new Christian community for people simply, culturally, Wednesday suited them better than Sunday. That was all. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes. At the other end of the spectrum, and I'll just give you a few examples. At the other end of the spectrum, there are churches which have been established in youth culture, where the music and form of the church is radically different to what we experience on Sunday. In the East End of London, where I used to serve, some of the biggest growth we had was with migrant communities, simply through having worship in other languages. So that there's a church I could take you to in Stratford, where on a Sunday they have, I think now, 4 services: one service in English, one service in Bulgarian, one service in Spanish, one service in Portuguese. So there are other ways in which we can imagine what it is to be the church. So I think now, all that came out of the question about pilgrimage, which I've deftly not answered really. Though it is a beautiful motif for what I wanted to share with you about an Anglican way of doing evangelism. A way which is of accompaniment, of building community, of allowing faith to grow. So I'll just say this, and then I'll get you to chat with each other. We can have some more questions. And I promise at the end, we'll have a little bit about actual pilgrimage. So I should have said this at the beginning of this section. God is the evangelist. The Holy Spirit is the evangelizer, not us. And of course, this is liberation, isn't it? It's not my job to convert people. And actually, I think I want to say, shame on me if I try. If I try to persuade somebody. My job is to be the faithful witness, the storyteller, able to share with others what I've received, to demonstrate it in the life I lead. So my job is to be like a living signpost, which is the lovely story you told, the living signpost, so that my life speaks of the goodness and the beauty, the hospitality, the generosity of God, and the faithful witness who shares what I've received. That's my job. Perhaps the best way of understanding the ministry of evangelism is as a midwife. That the midwife who ensures there is a safe delivery, but the midwife, of course, is not the one who creates the child. And these are Anglican ways of doing this, which can liberate us so that we discover, which we know but may not have spotted it, inside the scary word evangelism lies the beautiful word angel, which is really all it's about, sharing a message by the life we lead, by ensuring that our churches can be places of welcome to those who don't yet have faith, and by recognizing that each of us has a part to play, but God is the evangelizer. So, that's quite a lot to respond to. 3 takeaways. Could there be a place within our church for those who are not yet? People we meet in the journeys of our life, people we meet through our ministry. I mean, that's something that we're really good at in the Anglican Church. We're really good at serving our local communities. We have a lot of food banks and debt counselling reliefs and homelessness ministries. We're really good at this. We make contact with lots of people. So is there somewhere where the people we encounter in our daily lives and in our ministry could come together outside of Sunday to explore faith? And could we imagine ourselves inviting people into that journey and then walking with them? Or do we need to think about what happens on Sunday mornings? Or might some of those communities become embryonic churches? How does that feel? So 5 or so minutes with each other just responding to that, then a bit more Q&A, and then you'll be relieved to hear it's nearly all over. We'll be on the last lap, and I promise something about pilgrimage to end with. We're almost on the last lap, but before we do the last bit, a word from our sponsor.
Thank you so much. That would be me. So just to, sorry, I'm just going to switch gears for just half a second. So couple of things. I just want to, actually one comment, just in relation to the conversation at the Starbucks, because I was intrigued that I got an email just this week from somebody with starting the Dear Bishop John, which again, great start, but I'm struggling with my faith, and I don't go to church. What should I do? I mean, I'm obviously giving you a quick summary, but I thought, wow, like, what does it take for someone to email that to whoever, bishop, priest, deacon, friend? Just intrigued. So we'll see what happens. I'm hoping we can set up correspondence. I just want to name that because sometimes it can feel like, well, you know, Archbishop of York, these things happen. But honestly, it's intrigued. There are a lot of people thinking about their faith but aren't sure what to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing, completely different. So sorry about that. But I'm going to be dashing off. I'm heading off to the funeral for Herbert O'Driscoll, former dean of the cathedral here. So pray for me on Harbor Air. Hopefully it's all going to land well. But happy to be going there. But just delighted to be able to have heard the Archbishop of York speak. And know, as I promised at the beginning, it was going to be a wonderful morning, and certainly has not disappointed. So great to be here, and we are having dinner tomorrow night, so I'm going to get all the lowdown of how things go once I leave here. So thank you to everyone for being here, and God bless, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, John. And hearing you say that also reminds me that I do bring greetings from the Archbishop of Canterbury, which I meant to say at the beginning, who is praying for us today. When we work closely together in England, and when I told him I had this trip to Canada, he asked for a copy of the itinerary, which was then written into the Lambeth Palace prayer diary. So we're being prayed for. Also listening to what John just said, the other thing we've noticed in England, I don't know whether it's the same here, that kind of post-COVID, I've noticed with confirmations I'm doing, that there just seems to be a bit of an increase in, so often when I confirm, well, in fact nearly always when I confirm, I talk to the candidates beforehand and just ask them to say a bit of what their story is. So what happened to you to bring you to this point? And there just seems to be an increase in people saying things like, I had a dream. I had a dream and I kind of couldn't let go of this dream. And so I came to the church to kind of find out whether what I saw in this dream was real. Now, I don't understand this stuff. I've also had people I've also confirmed a few people who said, I didn't know whether there was a God or not, and so I did an internet search. Seriously, I've confirmed people who that's how their journey began. So again, I really think we really need to move on from the idea that people out there are not interested. I think COVID may have made a big change in the way the human race, particularly in cultures like ours, the way we see ourselves. We've all become much more aware of our mortality and our frailty. Then when you put in all the other things that are happening in our world at the moment, there's a lot of people asking questions about, so how are we going to live in peace with one another? And where can I find help for that? And younger people often aren't even asking the is God real question. They're asking the does it work? Does it make a difference? It's a really good question. And again, our churches need to become places where we can begin to explore and share that. So we haven't had any poetry yet this morning, which is a sad loss. So I think we must try to fit in at least one poem before we finish. But I've basically, you'll be relieved to hear, I've basically shared what I wanted to share. In the Church of England, we've set ourselves a few priorities. And they're right for us, they may not be right for you, but our priorities are, we want to be a church of missionary disciples. Helping the people of God to be disciples has become a key priority. We want to be a church where mixed ecology is the norm. So it's a bit of a clumsy phrase. Mixed ecology is the norm. But this has been a bit of a breakthrough in our thinking about ourselves as church. The church is an ecosystem. And we know from our observation of other ecosystems that ecosystems flourish when there is diversity. It's the diversity that makes the ecosystem flourish. And when there's a lack of diversity, the whole ecosystem closes in on itself. So if we think about the church as an ecosystem, we can therefore also conclude that the church will flourish and be healthy if there is greater diversity. And therefore, imagining church in different ways, new Christian communities with different cultural expressions, might be, paradoxically, the best way to help Sunday morning church, which generally in cultures like ours is shrinking. So they're the things that we're focusing on in the Church of England at the moment, some of which I've sort of tried to share a bit with you this morning. So I've finished everything I wanted to say except for one thing, and then it's Q&A, and then we'll be out of here with a poem and some pilgrimage. And this is my final bit before listening to your questions. If I had been in charge at Pentecost, I would have done it differently. I would have done it. I've got a much better idea than God's. So if you want to share your message with the whole world, and if you forgive me, that sort of power at your disposal, surely the sensible, rational, English, imperial, colonial way of doing it would have been get the whole world to speak the same language. That would be the easiest, most efficient way of getting your message across. And here, one thing I've learned from my visit we visited one of the indigenous schools, or what was an indigenous school last week. We took part in some truth and reconciliation stuff last Monday. I mean, the absolute tragedy is that that's exactly what the Anglican Church, mainly through English people, that is exactly what we tried to do, wasn't it? We tried to get everybody to speak the same language. We thought that was the way. I mean, it is, not only was that a horror and a disgrace, we thought, did we never learn from Pentecost? It's there. It's there in our scriptures that isn't the way of doing it. And yet that's what we did. We decided the best way to do it is we need to eliminate other cultures, and we must just have this one monoculture. And yet the Bible itself tells us clearly that is not the way to do it. At Pentecost, it is not the whole world speaking the same language. It is the Church of Jesus Christ speaking every language. Every language. And therefore every context, and therefore every culture. The great Scottish comedian Billy Connolly, who may or may not be known in Canada, he once noted, there is no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothes. And the task of the missionary church is not to eliminate other cultures, but to clothe the goodness and beauty of Jesus Christ in that culture and in that language, so that authentic, contextual, indigenous expressions of church come to life. And that which is true, therefore, for indigenous peoples as they receive the Christian faith and grow indigenous expressions of the church is also true for young people in goth culture And might also be true for elderly people who've never been to church in their life. That church has always, at its best, from the scriptures itself, taken on a cultural expression. And that's the great adventure of Christian mission, not to impose a culture on people, but to allow the gospel to cross-fertilize with the culture, so that authentic, contextual, non-coercive expressions of Christian church come to life, thus expanding the diversity of the ecosystem of the church, enabling the whole church to flourish. Our way of doing mission has diminished the ecosystem, so church becomes just this one monoculture, pretty much what we do on Sunday mornings, which, as we said earlier, is fine if you know what that culture is and you like that sort of thing, but if you don't, put a sign up saying, please stay away. No wonder our church is shrinking. We need a new missionary mindset. And I know it's hard for you in Canada, as it's hard for us in England, because we have made some terrible mistakes. I mean, look at the first great missionary challenge of the church also tells you all you need to know. The first great missionary challenge was at Antioch. You can read about it in Acts chapter 11. At Antioch, some Greek people who weren't Jews, Gentile Greek people, became followers of Jesus. And this was a big problem for the first Christians because they were all Jews, in the same way that people bringing the Anglican version of the Christian faith to Canada were all English. It's a problem. And the first Christians really thought that maybe in order to become a Christian, you've got to become a Jew first. In the same way that we thought in order to become a Christian, you've got to become an Anglican first, and you've got to take on English culture first. And then there was that momentous decision at the first council of the church when the church came to this amazing conclusion that it was possible to have a Greek, authentic, contextual version of the Christian faith, and therefore you didn't need to be circumcised before you were baptized. The whole mission history of the church flows from what God reveals to us at Pentecost and what happened at Antioch. Oh, but shame on us. We forgot that lesson. Now's the time to remember it. Not to say, because of that, we're just going to have to withdraw into ourselves and turn our faith into this private thing we have with Jesus that'll just keep us going till we die. No. We need to say there is another way of doing it. And I can't tell you, because this is uncharted territory, okay? So don't ask me for the map. I haven't got a map telling you what it'll look like in Canada, in Vancouver, in your parish. But I'm absolutely convinced that God is asking us to have a new missionary mindset, rooted in our scriptures and tradition, and enabled to share faith generously with those who long to know his peace. Right, that's it. I'm stopping. That's full stop. That's what I wanted to share with you. So I've finished. We got half an hour to go. We can finish early. But we've got half an hour to go. I promise you a poem and a little bit about pilgrimage before we stop, but we got time for questions. So does anybody have any questions, disagreements, observations, or insights that they want to share?
Thank you for this morning. For those who don't know, yes, I'm also English, in case you hadn't spotted it. I had an occasion, I suppose, about a month ago when every day for 7 days I wore my dog collar somewhere doing something in quite a public way. And I don't know whether you're aware of it, but as you've travelled west across Canada, you've slowly been, in terms of census data, coming to less and less religious places in Canada. You haven't quite got to the least religious place, which is just across the water in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. But we're pretty a-religious on this side of Canada. But every day for those 7 days when I was wearing my dog collar in a sort of public place, somebody wanted a conversation about faith every day. And one of those was simply to vent how awful the Christian church was, and his opening comment to me was, "People like you should be shot." And he meant it. The other 6 were all genuine people who were seeking something, and maybe they'd had conversations with other people as well. But I think we can get so depressed in Canada at the census data and at shrinking congregations and things, but actually there are a huge number of people who are seeking, who want those conversations and who want to find outlets to have those conversations. Not really a question, just a word of encouragement.
Yeah,
really.
no, that's really. I'm not surprised, but I am encouraged. I hope other people will be, because I think we do need. Often the problem lies within us. Thank you. There's a gentleman here.
I'll share something that I shared with our smaller group, and that was when people find out that I'm Christian, it will happen from time to time that people will say to me, "Oh, I don't believe in God." To which my response is, "Great, I'm glad you thought about it." And if the possibility presents itself, I'll ask them, "Tell me about the God that you don't believe in." And what I find most often is that I'm able to say with a straight face, "I don't believe in that God either." I think part of the problem is that we're cursed with a legacy of a medieval theology that's so seeps into our culture and our churches that people aren't able to see a possibility of a God who's not controlling, condemning, etc. And I don't know what to do about that, but I certainly want to sort of call it out.
Yeah, so thank you. Again, that is also my experience. And it's interesting and encouraging to hear you say that. My one additional note would be that I think we've noticed in some parts of the UK that actually, as the culture drifts further away from the memory of the Christian faith, actually it all becomes a bit easier all of a sudden. You suddenly find it gets easier. Because at the moment there's enough memory to know how awful it is, and to not believing in God is a conscious decision. But then you kind of move on to a sort of second or third generation beyond that, where there's not even the memory. And then actually there becomes a greater openness. Now, it also means that the journey into faith could be a lot longer. But that's okay. Shall we stop? Oh, no, there's a gentleman right at the back.
When you run like that, Chris, you make me tired. Two things, one an encouraging thing, one observation. Between last year, this year, and next year, 1.4 million new people will come to this country. A Roman Catholic sociologist from St. Jerome's University said 60% of them will be Christians. They're looking for home.
Yeah.
Might we be part of that welcome? That's the first thing. Secondly, I very much appreciated how you set up concerns about coercion, fundamentalism, all those kinds of things, as almost an intellectual and spiritual dialysis to clean it up, so that we could move on to not what we are not, but what we could be. And I think it's really important to expend our emotional energy in that invitation, rather than continually picking at the past. And I found that very helpful today, and thankful. And trust and hope and pray that that's the trajectory, the new hope in Christ, in Scripture and tradition, and the things you have said. one last thing, something you referred to, but not by program, Fresh Expressions is a Methodist and Anglican invitation for those small group of churches that begin around particular themes. And there's a group of sommeliers in North America that was started from that. And they call themselves Wine Study and Bible Tasting. So there's lots of possibilities, and I thank you so very much.
Oh, bless you, brother. Thank you. That's, again, really encouraging to hear you say that. And yes, putting our energy into what could be is a very beautiful way of putting it. And certainly that's what I'm working hard for in the Church of England. And I would encourage you to do that as well.
Really pleased with all that you have shared with us today. And I'm pleased because I see little sprouts of the things that you are talking about throughout our diocese happening. The question I have is, based on the curiosities that have come out of the questions from folks today, presuming that we have an idea of where we're going, that we need to leave where we are now, what are some of the things that we need to let go of and leave behind?
Okay, so that is the perfect segue into finishing with a few thoughts about pilgrimage. So I don't know people's names, but as the lady, Peggy, as the lady in the green, Peggy said, asking me about pilgrimage. Pilgrimage journey, accompanying people on the journey is a really helpful motif for thinking about the church that we could be. But it's also helpful, and it's also helpful in terms of our own spiritual life. But one of the ways I find it particularly helpful is by asking ourselves the question, so what do we pick up and what do we put down? So I've been on many walking pilgrimages across England, and 6-7 years ago, I went on the great walking pilgrimage of the world to Santiago de Compostela in Galicia in northern Spain. And I dreamed of this, but it's a long way. I dreamed of this for a while, and I thought, if I don't do it soon, I'll be too decrepit. So anyway, having received some sabbatical leave, one happy day, I said Mass in the chapel where I was living at Bishop's Court in Chelmsford. I said goodbye to Rebecca, my wife. I walked to the station at a place called Ingatstone. I got the train to London, a cross train to Plymouth. I got the overnight ferry to Santander. If you run up a mental model map of Spain, Santander's over here, Santiago's over here. I basically walked along the northern coast of Spain and turned left. And I walked 500 or 600 miles. It took me, about 500 miles. Took a month. In preparing for this journey, I read some guidebooks and some websites about going on a long walk. I'd walked to Walsingham, I'd walked to Canterbury, I'd walked to York, I'd walked to Glastonbury. I'd done shorter walks across England, but I'd never done such a pilgrimage. And I did it on my own because I was craving solitude, which I thought I could find on the road, particularly in the mountains of northern Spain. So all the guidebooks I read advised that because you're carrying everything on your back, they advised that if you can, implying that you probably can't, they said if you can, see if you can get your rucksack down to 9 kilograms. They said that was a reasonable weight to carry. Don't make it much more than that. So I packed my rucksack on the day before I left, I weighed it, and it came in at only just after 9 kilograms, and I was really pleased with myself. I thought, Stephen, you are traveling light. Only 9 kilograms of stuff for this month's journey. But really sobering self-discovery, I discovered that even though I only had 9 kilograms of stuff, first of all, I can assure you 9 kilograms is when you're walking uphill in the mountains of northern Spain, in the heat of northern Spain, 9 kilograms is a lot. But the sobering discovery was it was too much. I had too much stuff. So for instance, I took with me 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of knickers, 3 shirts. I had 3 of everything. I discovered that you only need 2. Wash one, wear one, wash one, wear one. That's all I needed. And honestly, because I've led, quite a comfortable life. I've never in my life really ever been in serious doubt about where I'm going to sleep tonight, where the next meal is coming from. I've been, like many people in cultures like ours, I've led a comfortable life. This was the first time in my life when each day I wasn't quite sure where I was going to sleep that night, and I wasn't quite sure where the next meal was coming from. And my life has been completely stripped back to only 9 kilograms of stuff, and it's still too much stuff. And I have to be honest with you, again, the irony of this is not lost on me. If you Google me after the meeting to see where I live in a palace. Think Downton Abbey. That's basically where I live. The irony of this is not lost on me. But things became real for me. So there's this prayer I say every day. I don't know whether you know it. It begins, Our Father. Do you know this prayer? I say it every day. There's a line in it which I think it was only on pilgrimage that I learnt what it means. Give us today our daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. So I think what that means is, give me, Lord, enough for today. Stop me. Prevent me from wanting more than my share. Because the reality is, I don't just want daily bread, I would really like tomorrow's bread as well today, and frankly, I'm not that bothered if I have your bread. And I think I learnt on the road that there is no other question more pressing for the human race at the moment than to learn what it means to only pray for your daily bread. The whole world is in peril because we all want more bread. It's the source of the climate emergency because we're plundering the planet so that we can have more. Our whole economic system is built upon growth, endless growth. We will only save ourselves if we learn what enough looks like. What is enough? And most of our wars start by wanting more. So that discipline, that spiritual discipline of learning what do I need, what is enough, is really important for us as individuals. It's really important for us as a human race. It's really important for us as a church. And it might just be, because we are the people who say every day, give us our daily bread, it might just be that this is one of the gifts the Christian church can offer the world. Saying we need to rebuild the world around what it is to have enough. And for the Christian faith, when you actually start asking yourself, so what do we actually need to carry with us? I mean, it is hardly anything. I know church adopts these beautiful sometimes, also tedious at other times, cultural expressions, but what do you actually need? A Bible? A loaf of bread? I'm struggling now to think of anything else. A bowl of water? I'm really, really struggling to think of anything else that you absolutely need to be God's people. Well, yes, you need yes, you're right. Yeah, sorry, you're absolutely right. I'm thinking of the things, what you need, but the thing is that the things shape us. When you realize that's all you need, then you're perhaps better able to be hospitable. You're better able to be undefended. But yes, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're so right. You're so right. And I need to repeat back what you're saying because maybe not everyone can hear. What you're speaking of is the hospitality of others. And for me, that was the other great lesson of going on pilgrimage. I was vulnerable in a way that I'm not usually vulnerable. And I was absolutely dependent upon the hospitality of others. And I will remember for the rest of my life, you stay in these little pilgrim hostels, which are dotted in every village across Spain. There's these little hostels with sort of bunk beds in them where you can stay for a few euros. Occasionally, the hostels were full, which I always thought was God's way of saying, go to a hotel. So I was quite... Well, leave that to one side. But there's this little hostel in a place called Penduel, a tiny little village in northern Spain. And I got to the hostel, and they did have a bed, and I was very grateful for the bed. But the man who ran the hostel said, "Would I like him to wash my clothes?" And I'd been on the road for a couple of weeks at that point, washing my clothes in the basin, in the sort of communal washrooms, So they were clean, but they weren't that clean. And he took my clothes and he washed them and then returned them to me. It was an act of extraordinary kindness. And he said to me, I don't speak hardly any Spanish, he spoke hardly any English, but we kind of communicated. And he cooked for us, he fed us. He was such a kind man. And I said to him, so where does this kindness come from? This huge kindness, and he just, and he spoke in his faltering English about what he had received from Jesus, and that he now lived to share that with others. So let's stop. Poem. So on the way of this great pilgrimage, I set myself the happy task of writing a sonnet every day. I thought I've got nothing else to do. I'm walking for 9 or 10 hours, day after day. And I thought the good thing about, if you remember a sonnet, 14 lines, 5 feet, 10 syllables in each line. I thought, well, I'll write a sonnet every day. And I thought, well, I can kind of compose it in my head as I walk, and then write it down in the evenings. And I thought it would just be another way of kind of chronicling my journey. I never thought they'd be published. I wrote them for my own joy and as a way of kind of making sense of what was happening. And many of the poems were not all of them, but many of them were about Christ, whom I felt at my side and spoke to as I walked. I sang a lot as I walked, and I spoke to Christ as I walked. And that came out in the poems. The other big thing was I had this bloody great pack on my back, and so the theme of weight, carrying heavy weights, putting down heavy weights, also came into the poems. So I want to finish by reading you one, and I kind of offer it to you because, I don't know you. And I don't know where you are with God. I don't know whether God feels real to you or not. I don't know what burdens you're carrying, though I know you will be carrying burdens. And so I finish by offering you this poem, both as individuals and as a church, inviting you to bring your burdens to Jesus, to lay them down. And none of this is going to happen unless, first of all, we know just how much we are loved and that God is on our side and he is for us. So the poem is called, I Know a Man Who Carries Heavy Loads. I know a man who carries heavy loads, for whom no weight's too sharp, nor yet too sheer, who does not ask whence such a burden came, or why it has been carried all these years, but does not share it, splitting half with half, or say, you get what you deserve, no less. It is for ones like me still undeserving that he comes to shoulder and to bless. He picks up what you press on him and chides you with a smile if you persist in keeping what you cannot bear. His heart is strong, though not a strength incapable of weeping. Oh, come to him, if broken, burdened, sad. In holding you, this strong man's heart is glad. Amen.